Good evening, friends, and welcome once again to Men Around the Führer series. Gather close and listen to a strange tale. A tale not of warriors or kings, but of a man whose weapon was light, whose battlefield was paper, and whose fortunes were tied inextricably to one of the most terrifying figures of the 20th century. We speak tonight of Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's personal photographer, the man who shaped the Führer myth and earned a king's ransom by turning a dictator's face into a commodity. The threads of this story begin not in the shadows of the Reich, but in the heart of Bavaria, in the town of Fürth on September 12, 1885. His father, Robert Hoffmann, came from a lineage of pioneers in professional photography, a craft that had defined their family for decades. Though his father acquired the grand title of court photographer to His Majesty the King of Bavaria, a title later revealed by Heinrich to be merely purchased rather than truly earned, it nonetheless lent prestige to their business and pointed young Heinrich toward his destiny. From a tender age, it was clear that Heinrich possessed an innate business acumen, a knack for capturing events that mattered. His first notable photograph, taken in 1898, captured Colonel William Cody, better known as Buffalo Bill, astride a white horse, lassoing rope during his Wild West shows tour through southern Germany. Hoffmann, even as a schoolboy, knew the value of the image, selling several copies to his school friends. He would later quip that his memoir could aptly be titled From Buffalo Bill to Adolf Hitler. Hoffmann grew up amidst the breathtaking acceleration of the Second Industrial Revolution, 1870 to 1914, a period far more transformative than its predecessor, bringing forth electrification, telecommunications, and, crucially, the rapid development and refinement of photography since the 1830s. He witnessed firsthand how this new technology could be wielded for grand narratives. Indeed, Emperor Napoleon III had already used photography extensively to promote his building programs in Paris, while cleverly obscuring the surrounding urban squalor. The use of photography for propaganda would become central to Hoffmann's entire life and career. By age 20, around 1905 or 1906, Hoffmann left Germany to hone his skills in a London photography studio, venturing later through France and Switzerland. This was a vibrant era for professional photographers, marked by the release of the Lumiere brothers' first mass-produced color camera, the Autochrome Lumiere, in 1907. Returning to Bavaria, he established his own studio in Munich, focusing on portraiture and freelance work for local newspapers. His reputation and financial standing grew significantly when he managed to photograph Enrico Caruso, the celebrated Italian tenor, despite Caruso's restrictive contracts. Hoffmann profited handsomely, receiving 400 marks for the original newspaper sale and a further 2,000 marks from selling reproductions. Then came the Great War in the summer of 1914. It was during the initial rush of patriotic fervor in the Odeonsplatz in Munich that Hoffmann may have unwittingly captured the man who would define his life. Photographing the thronging crowd from an upstairs window, Hoffmann's lens secured an image that Nazi propagandists would later magnify and disseminate widely, claiming it showed a young Adolf Hitler among the patriots. This image became a cornerstone of the Nazi mythos, though many historians have since questioned its authenticity, noting that Hitler's distinctive toothbrush mustache, visible in the photo, was allegedly adopted several years later. Tellingly, Hoffmann himself frequently referred to the enormous profits derived from the sales of that specific photograph. When drafted, Hoffmann's photographic skills secured him a position as a press photographer in the German Imperial Army, introducing him directly to the world of state propaganda and the strategic production of images to support official narratives. He even worked as an aerial photographer on reconnaissance missions over the Western Front. During these years, his personal life flourished. He had married Therese Baumann in 1911, and they welcomed a daughter, Henriette, 1913, and a son, Heinrich, 1916. before Therese's untimely death in 1928. He would later marry Erna Grobke, a composer, in 1929. Despite his professional focus, Hoffmann harbored deep personal weaknesses. A pervasive fondness for wealth and money, coupled with the growing problem with alcoholism that sometimes led members of the Nazi inner circle to dismiss him as the court jester due to his weight and loose tongue. The collapse of the German Empire in 1918 thrust Bavaria into turmoil, culminating in the short-lived Bavarian Soviet Republic. Hoffmann, an eyewitness to the resultant street battles, expertly utilized his camera to document these events, publishing his first book of photographs, 1 Year of Bavarian Revolution in Pictures, in 1919. It was during this era of post-war chaos that Heinrich Hoffmann's fate irrevocably intersected with that of Adolf Hitler. Drawn to the nascent National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, Hoffmann claimed his early membership, recorded as number 57, was simply a journalistic pursuit, believing important events would occur around this new political figure. Post-war trials necessitated this narrative, yet historians believe Hoffmann was genuinely attracted to the Nazi platform, which blamed Germany's woes on communists and the Jewish community. Regardless of his initial motives, Hoffmann quickly became Hitler's personal photographer, a position he would hold for nearly 25 years. It is a simple truth that most posed photographs of Adolf Hitler extant today were likely taken by Hoffmann. He possessed the unique ability to portray Hitler, a man who was, ironically, the antithesis of the idealized blonde, blue-eyed German he promoted, as a charismatic leader. Hoffmann became the chronicler of the Nazi Party from its inception. He was present at pivotal early events, including the chaotic beer hall Putsch in November 1923, capturing many of the extant photos from the failed coup. The bond between Hitler and Hoffmann was personal and profound. Hitler valued Hoffmann's seeming lack of political ambition, finding him content merely to be the Nazi photographer. Hoffmann remained loyal, meeting Hitler upon his early release from Landsberg prison in 1924. They frequently dined together, sharing non-political interests. But Hoffmann's most historically significant act of personal intimacy was his role as a matchmaker. It was through Heinrich Hoffmann that Adolf Hitler met Eva Braun. Braun, born in 1912, was a German photographer who worked in Hoffmann's Munich studio, initially as a shop assistant and sales clerk. She learned quickly how to use a camera and develop photographs. In October 1929, Hoffmann and his wife introduced the 17-year-old Braun to the 40-year-old Hitler, whom she knew initially as Herr Wolf. Her younger sister Gretel also worked for Hoffmann starting in 1932. Hoffmann's continued acquaintance allowed him to facilitate the burgeoning, secretive relationship, frequently inviting Eva and his second wife to Hitler's alpine retreat, the Berghof, near Berchtesgaden. As Hitler ascended to power through political maneuverings, culminating in his appointment as Chancellor in 1933 and Führer in 1934, Hoffmann's crafted imagery was central to this dramatic rise. His photographs transformed Hitler into the magnetic savior of Germany that voters sought. Hoffmann produced annual photo books documenting the Nazi rallies, including the provocatively staged 1926 rally in Weimar. In 1932, he published The Hitler Nobody Knows, designed to present a carefully stylized and personal version of the leader. This creation of the Führer required meticulous visual censorship. Hitler was fanatical about maintaining an image of purposeful leadership, forbidding the distribution of informal or relaxed images. He specifically ordered the suppression of photographs showing him in lederhosen, the traditional Bavarian short trousers. Furthermore, and perhaps most critically, Hitler insisted he must never be photographed wearing glasses. Despite suffering from deteriorating eyesight, a result of mustard gas contact during WWII, Hitler regularly wore reading glasses. The success of Hoffmann's censorship was such that few realized today that Hitler routinely required them. Hoffmann's professional life in Hitler's orbit was demanding and often dictated entirely by the whims of the dictator. He recounts that he was given no creative direction. Instead, a secretary would call, demanding his immediate presence for a shoot. Once there, Hoffmann was expected to capture Hitler in one of his three familiar public poses: head stiff, chin in, hands on hips or folded across the chest. With no photographer, not even Hoffmann, daring to suggest a change, Hoffmann survived by capturing fleeting, spontaneous moments when Hitler was distracted, shouting, "There, hold it, just like that." By the mid-1930s, Hoffmann's status solidified within the Third Reich. He was recognized as the official photographer of Hitler and senior party photographer. Despite a hostile relationship with propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, Hoffmann's closeness to Hitler brought him patronage, including election to the Reichstag in 1933, a ceremonial post after the Nazis seized power, and later the honorary title of professor. The true engine of Hoffmann's power, however, was economic. He became exceedingly wealthy, achieving multi-millionaire status in modern terms by the end of the decade. He held exclusive rights to the reproduction and sale of his myriad images of the Führer. These images were omnipresent, adorning everything from postcards and photo books to postage stamps across Germany and occupied Europe. These royalties funneled through his company, the publisher of National Socialist Pictures, which sounded like a government institution, but of which Hoffmann was the sole shareholder, generated immense sums, a slice of which went to Hitler for cultural programs. The income grew so vast during the war that had Germany prevailed, Hoffmann might have become a billionaire. Hoffmann's personal influence extended beyond mere photography and propaganda. He was one of the few who continued to address the dictator as Herr Hitler, a familiarity that irritated rivals like Goebbels, but which Hitler personally permitted. Hitler, having been an unsuccessful artist in his youth, displayed a profound and continued interest in art and architecture. He surrounded himself with cultural figures like Hoffmann and Albert Speer. When visiting the Hoffmann household in Berlin, the two men would often talk about art late into the night over tea. Though Hitler was typically abstinent, on one occasion he accepted a glass of wine, only to complain of its bitterness and add lumps of sugar. Hoffmann's connection to the art world cemented his influence in 1937, when he played a crucial role in curating the first great German art exhibition in Munich. Hitler, displeased with the initial selection made by interior decorator Gerdy Troost, who was removed for selecting degenerate art, appointed Hoffmann as the critical individual with a virtual veto over the artwork included. Though many German artists were scandalized by Hoffmann's elevation, citing his mediocre knowledge of art, his primary function, aligned with Nazi ideology, was censoring and rooting out art deemed pornographic or degenerate. Hoffmann also served on diplomatic missions, sometimes accompanying Hitler, such as the state visit to Mussolini's Italy in 1938, which resulted in the photo book Hitler in Italy. More curiously, he accompanied Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop to the Soviet Union in 1939 to negotiate the Non-Aggression Pact. Hitler allegedly tasked Hoffmann with covertly taking close-up photographs of Joseph Stalin's earlobe, hoping to determine if rumors of Stalin's Jewish ancestry were true. Hoffmann later claimed that based on his inspection, Hitler determined Stalin was not Jewish and could be temporarily allied with. This episode highlights the bizarre behavior incited by Nazi anti-Semitism and Hitler's extreme, if sometimes delusional, trust in Hoffmann to glean intelligence. Hoffmann photographed Hitler in one of his most famous poses during the German annexation of Austria, Anschluss, in March 1938. Unexpectedly invited by Hitler for a drive, Hoffmann found himself crossing the border and photographing Hitler in his hometown of Braunau am Inn, an image later used for a postage stamp marking Hitler's 50th birthday. As the war commenced in 1939 and the Nazis systematically plundered Europe for art and cultural objects, including an estimated 650,000 artworks stolen between 1933 and 1945, Hoffmann became a prominent participant in accumulating looted assets. He acquired approximately 278 paintings, focusing particularly on masters of the Dutch Golden Age. Although Hitler preferred looted art to be displayed in Nazi museums, a clandestine market flourished among the Nazi elite, with Hoffmann actively entering bidding wars for pieces acquired by agents in France and the Netherlands. Throughout the early war years, Hoffmann continued to attend regular late-night tea parties with Hitler at 1:00 a.m. in Berlin, a tradition later moved to the Wolf's Lair bunker in Prussia. These gatherings were frustrating for attendees like Hoffmann, who, fueled by drugs like amphetamines, would listen as Hitler ranted about trivial, non-political topics such as train accidents, while his staff struggled to remain awake. The decline of Hoffmann's standing mirrored Germany's military decline. His excessive drinking became problematic as Hitler himself grew increasingly irritable and suspicious following the failure to conquer the Soviet Union. Hoffmann's rivals, especially Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary, and Dr. Theodor Morell, Hitler's personal physician, whom Hoffmann himself had introduced to Hitler years earlier to treat an eczema problem, actively worked to alienate him. They concocted a story that Hoffmann suffered from a contagious thyroid disorder, parathyroid B, leading Hitler, whose own health was failing, to banish Hoffmann from his presence, starting in 1943. Hoffmann's alienation was further exacerbated by his daughter, Henrietta Hoffmann, who married Baldur von Schirach. During a 1943 visit to the Berghof, Henrietta confronted Hitler about the brutal treatment of the Dutch Jews. Hitler reacted curtly, "You are sentimental," or flew into a rage, depending on the account, resulting in Henrietta and her husband being permanently banned from the Berghof. Hoffmann, despite being deeply compromised by his quarter-century association with the genocidal regime, later claimed he remained politically apolitical, suggesting he attempted to protect several Jewish individuals from the final solution. He claimed to have deceived Hitler into interceding for a young Jewish artist named Feuerle by presenting his portfolio without mentioning his Jewish background, alleging he was only arrested for anti-war protests. In early 1945, desperate to see Hitler and refute the claims of contagion, Hoffmann obtained a medical letter proving the disorder fabrication. He traveled to the Führer bunker in besieged Berlin. However, upon entering Hitler's office, the ailing Führer pulled away with a startled expression, terrified of infection, refusing to listen to Hoffmann's explanation. This final tragic rejection cemented Hoffmann's understanding that Morell, the doctor he introduced, had transformed Hitler into a frail, unreasonable man through a heavy cocktail of drugs. Just hours before his own suicide on April 30, 1945, Hitler married Eva Braun, 16 years after Hoffmann had first brought the couple together. A few days after the war concluded in Europe, on May 10, 1945, American troops arrested Heinrich Hoffmann. Allied prosecutors lacked evidence to charge him with major war crimes, but they were determined to prosecute such a high-profile figure close to Hitler. They settled on a charge of war profiteering, a fitting charge given that money and social recognition appeared to be his primary motivations throughout his career. He was convicted in early 1947 and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The verdict was documented in the Weltim film newsreel, issue number 89, which noted that Hoffmann, during his address to the judge, angrily claimed he was merely a victim of his profession, merely photographing current events. The prosecution was led by public prosecutor Julius Herf, before president of the court, Jos Purser. However, the dawn of the Cold War quickly changed the calculus for prosecuting former Nazis. Hoffmann's sentence was appealed and reduced to 4 years. leading to his release in May 1950 based on time already served. Hoffmann was physically changed by his incarceration, having lost a considerable amount of weight due to being deprived of alcohol. In one of the most controversial aspects of his legacy, the Bavarian provincial government later returned some of his confiscated wealth and looted art collection. This decision ignited investigations by the Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives program, the Monuments Men, a body dedicated to restoring looted cultural property. After his release, Hoffmann settled in Epfach, Bavaria. He published his controversial memoirs, Hitler Was My Friend, in 1955. This book, while offering rare details of Hitler's private life, drew criticism for Hoffmann's unapologetic tone and insistence on avoiding discussion of the regime's political horrors. He claimed his sole honor was documenting history. Hoffmann died in Munich on December 16, 1957, at the age of 72. His photographic legacy endures. The central image archive of his company was seized by the U.S. military after the war, and important parts are currently located in the U.S. National Archives in Maryland. This archive today remains one of the most vital sources for researching Nazi Germany. The part of the archive that remained in Europe was acquired by the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek in Munich through purchases in 1992, 2001, and 2003. This European collection comprises nearly 70,000 negatives and prints, documenting historical events in Bavaria and Germany from 1914 to 1945, the history of the NSDAP, and portraits of high-ranking Nazi officials. The controversy over his looted art continued long after his death. The Bavarian state sold one looted painting, Jan van der Heyden's View of a Dutch Square, back to Hoffmann's daughter, Henrietta, in 1962 for a nominal fee, before it was eventually returned to the heirs of the Krauss family in 2019. Hoffmann was a complex figure, a pioneer in modern photography, a shrewd businessman, a political insider, and Hitler's closest friend. He was responsible for creating some of the most enduring photographic portraits of Hitler and wielded significant cultural power, including classifying degenerate art and profiting enormously from the machinery of the Third Reich. Though he claimed to be merely a journalist, there is no denying that Heinrich Hoffmann was deeply and ethically compromised by his decades-long association with Adolf Hitler and the dark reality of the Third Reich. His narrative remains a chilling testament to how proximity to power can distort reality, elevate influence, and ultimately ensure an unforgettable, though morally conflicted, place in history. He gave the monster its face, and for that, history remembers his name.